In 2001 A Space Odyssey, our last sight of the American spacecraft Discovery 1 is one of departure. We have watched as the Discovery reached the Jovian system. The Discovery has slowed down enough to enter orbit over Io. Now we watch as David Bowman departs from the ship in a pod. The Discovery slips out of frame, her task done. The Discovery story did not end with the departure of David Bowman. It was continued in the 1984 sequel, 2010, or 2010 The Year We Make Contact, to use its US title. In this video, we shall consider the state in which we find the spacecraft in the sequel film, and ask, why was she spinning? There are certain scenes and sights in film that stick in the public consciousness, and there are certain scenes and sights in film that stick in the consciousness of the individual, becoming particular or memorable. For me, the sight of the derelict Discovery spinning in her deteriorating orbit over Io is one of those memorable sights. It has an eerie quality to it. Like a city at night suffering from a power failure, it seems strange and wrong. When we last saw her, the Discovery was a well-lit, clean, and operational human vehicle. In 2010, we find her lifeless, dark, dirty, and dead. She is the Mary Celeste of space, abandoned and mysterious. She is almost beyond reach, familiar but abandoned, recognizably human but no longer in our hands. She has witnessed the non-human, the alien. If her bulkheads could talk, what mysteries and revelations would they reveal to us? The Discovery filming models used in 2010 were not the same ones built for 2001, as both the models and the plans for them had been destroyed after filming was complete, reportedly on the orders of Stanley Kubrick himself. New filming models had to be built for Peter Hyam's film, based on stills from 2001. At some point it was decided to scale up this Discovery, so it was about 800 feet long, nearly doubling the size of the ship. So, in a very real sense, the Discovery of 2010 is not really the Discovery of 2001. The model makers must have been very happy about all that sulfur. The story of 2010 begins with a problem. The Discovery's orbit is deteriorating, and no one knows why. What is certain, though, is that if the ship and the answers to what happened are to be retrieved, then it must be very soon. The question as to why the orbit is failing probably lies with the yellow sulfur covering the ship. With every eruption on Io, sulfur is blasted far up into space, as far as 300 miles in fact. And as the Discovery is covered in it, it is reasonable to suppose the passage of the Discovery through the dust particles is creating enough friction to slow the spacecraft's orbit. The reason for the deteriorating orbit, though, is not made clear in the film. Io is one of Jupiter's 4 Galilean moons, and is covered with sulfur, sulfur dioxide frost, and volcanoes, as many as 400. Io is very active in a geological sense. Indeed, in the book by Arthur C. Clarke, 2010 Odyssey 2, upon which the film was based, there is a direct reference to the land of Mordor from The Lord of the Rings. How did Tolkien know? But Io is not the only factor affecting the derelict Discovery. There is the cold. In the film, Floyd supposes that the temperature aboard the Discovery must be 100 degrees below zero. That is bloody cold. There are also Jupiter's radiation belts. It is remarkable so much of the Discovery's circuitry and systems still work, despite the ship being icy cold and constantly bathed in powerful radiation. This radiation is strong enough to cut down an unprotected astronaut's likely chances of survival to a few minutes. But more pertinent to the discovery, the radiation belts damage electronics, and so the recent Juno probe has an orbit over Jupiter's poles to cut down radiation exposure. We can assume the engineers of the fictional Discovery built into the design something like the shielding enjoyed by the Juno probe. In the film, Floyd mentions that with such radiation, the boarding party have only 15 minutes to enter the Discovery. It is not explained in the film, but according to Clarke's novel, the spin comes from the bearings of the centrifuge system seizing up. This causes the energy of the centrifuge's spin, stored in its flywheel, to be transferred to the rest of the ship. Another possibility, though, is a leak, either of gas or liquid, which might act upon the Discovery like a thruster. Having reached the pod bay, the boarding party discover there is breathable air. So if the spin was initiated by an air leak, then it could not have been a particularly large leak. It should be noted, however, that a very small leak over an 8 or 9 year period might be sufficient, but without further information, this can only remain conjecture. We might also suppose that the Discovery suffered a collision of some sort. This would not have to be a big collision, but instead something like a strong sulfur plume from Io, which might give, say, the command module a gentle shove. If Clarke's explanation for the spin is correct, then there is a problem. The direction of the spin would depend upon the orientation of the centrifuge and its flywheel. For the sake of argument, let us suppose the flywheel to be orientated in the same direction as the centrifuge. According to various diagrams, and to any examination of the command module of the Discovery, the only place the centrifuge could be was behind the pod bay and flight deck, in the after portion of the command module. But if this was the case, then the seizing of the bearings would have transferred the spin in such a way as to make the Discovery spin along its long axis. Over time, a wobble might develop as the antennae complex amidships interfered with the spin, and perhaps the spin seen in the film might have eventually come about. But the long axis rotation would probably have remained, thereby making boarding the Discovery a wilder experience, if not downright impossible. So, where was the centrifuge on the Discovery? Well, the centrifuge could not have been located horizontally between the pod bay and the flight deck, as there was clearly not enough space on the model. Not only that, but had it been located there, the spin would have been sideways, with the rotational axis moving down the length of the ship as the weight was distributed more evenly over time. In order for the end-over-end spin we see in 2010 to develop, the centrifuge and its flywheel would have had to be located vertically, with the centrifuge edges fore and aft like a bicycle wheel. This, though, is impossible as the flight deck and pod bay were in the way. So, if the centrifuge and its flywheel were located in the after portion of the command module, and this is the only realistic place it could go, then it seems the Discovery's spin was wrong. Even without HAL, the Discovery was still able to reach Jupiter and achieve a, at the time, stable orbit over Io. The systems must have been able to run on automatic. Could Mission Control on Earth have had some remote command over the Discovery? It should be noted that based on 2010, it is clear that, first, the Americans were monitoring the Discovery's orbit, and second, that they had received Bowman's final words. "My God, it's full of stars," even though this line was not spoken in 2001: A Space Odyssey. They were said in the novelization, though. What happened to the Discovery after Bowman's departure? We can speculate. In the script for 2010, Victor Milson said he was glad the Discovery had some reserve power, which Curnow is seen using to stop the spin and power up the ship. As the Discovery used a nuclear fission engine reactor, not all of her electrical systems could have been shut down. The reactor would have had to be monitored after all, and Bowman's message would have had to be relayed to Earth via the Discovery's more powerful communications array. But if Bowman did indeed shut down many of the Discovery's systems before his departure, then that raises a question. What made him believe he was not returning? The Discovery was fully lit and powered up when Bowman left to examine the monolith. Presumably, some of her systems were running on automatic, but these systems began to fail. At some point, meat left in the ship's galley spoiled. In the script for 2010, Curnow supposes this must have been before the Discovery froze up. Given the speed at which meat can spoil, this might give us a time frame for how soon after Bowman's departure the Discovery's automated kitchen and then her heating systems shut down. As a basic rule of thumb, most meat stored in a fridge at 4 degrees centigrade will last between 3 to 5 days. But we do not know enough about the automated kitchen or whether the rotting meat was frozen to make an estimate. There is some sense in Bowman stopping the centrifuge and transferring the spin to the flywheel before departing. After all, the centrifuge was the largest moving feature inside the ship, and there would have been little point in leaving it spinning if he was away examining TMA-2. As the Discovery's systems failed one by one, either the heating system or whatever was keeping the bearings lubricated would have stopped, and the rotational force would have been transferred from the flywheel to the whole structure of the ship, and then she would have gone dark and froze up. As the years went by, she would go on orbiting Io, and with every orbit, more and more sulfur would have accumulated on her hull, and with every orbit the speed of her orbit would have decreased, with potentially destructive consequences. "2010, the year we make contact, is objectively a good science fiction film, and the sight of the Discovery 1 slowly spinning end over end above the orange-yellow surface of Io is striking. It is a sharp contrast to what we see of the Discovery near the end of 2001: A Space Odyssey. The clean, well-lit ship has, like David Bowman, been transformed by an environment alien to what humanity is used to. A combination of factors played on the Discovery after Bowman's departure. The shutting down of the onboard systems, whether by Bowman or through entropy, the volcanism of Io, the frigid temperatures of the Jovian system, and possibly the strong radiation might have had an effect. At some point, the bearings of the flywheel seized up, and the Discovery's spin began.